flexibility in the schedule, so we can have slightly longer breaks, and it won't be sort of jammed together. So that's good. Doug Walker from the rap team at Idaho State won't be here today. They're playing in Nevada, and so he won't be able to join us. Although he sent his presentation, we could get it if we have time, but I think we'll have plenty of items on the agenda. So the format will be, most of the talks are scheduled for 20 minutes, and with the idea that it'll be about a 15-minute presentation followed by about 5 minutes of questions. But we still have a lot of talks to get through. So I'll be kind of the gatekeeper and the timekeeper, and I will move people along to make sure we stay relatively on schedule. Again, I think we'll expand our breaks. I think I had them for 10 minutes, but we'll make them 15 minutes so people can walk around. If you want, down the hallway to the right, if you go outside, they're tearing down our medical school, which was the largest building on campus, and it looks like Armageddon, all these diggers. It's pretty cool. So if you get a break and want to go see something that looks pretty dramatic, they're tearing that down over there. And this way to the south, they're tearing down our old medical towers, and they have a big wrecking ball, and that's pretty dramatic as well. So they're always building new things here and tearing old things down. So our new medical school is going up just to the west of us here, and that should be ready to, I think, next fall, like a little over a year from now. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker. Let me pull up the talk. We'll give up the mic. Brandon.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Brandon Peterson. I'm an undergraduate here at the University of Utah, and today I'm going to be presenting to you my research on background radiation levels around the Salt Lake area and how this data can be applied in the field of nuclear engineering. So the general format for this presentation is going to have 4 main sections. We'll start with a short introduction of myself and why I did this project, followed by a quick summary of the equipment and methods that were used to achieve the goals of this research. From there, we'll move into the results and any significant findings that were made along the way, finishing with a discussion and analysis of how this data can be applied in the real world. So, as a little short introduction to myself, I wanted to give you a couple pictures that I think encapsulate who I am outside of the field of study. The first picture that you see, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, is a hike in southern Utah in Arches National Park. If I'm not working, if I'm not studying, 99% of the time you'll see me outside doing all these sort of adventures. Luckily enough, seeing as though we're in Utah, there's plenty of those for me to explore. The second image that you see would be 10-year-old me laying on the ground back at home in Austin, Texas, where I was born and raised, next to my, at the time, brand new puppy that we named Milo. There's not a lot more to this image, but I do love my dog, so I want to give him a quick shout out here. And the last image is of a golf course back in Austin, Texas, which is my current obsession. I love golf, and for any of you who play it, it's just as fun as it is frustrating. And so no matter how many times it beats me down, I always come back to it. And if you are ever in the Salt Lake area and are on a golf course, good chance you might see it. Okay, anyways, let's get into the project. So why did I choose to do a complete background radiation survey of the Salt Lake area? Well, there was a few factors that sort of influenced this decision. First of all, as a soon-to-be civil engineering graduate, I have interest in things like city operations and how communities are run. Building off that, my primary interest is into energy production for these communities. I often find myself wondering, how can we improve upon current modes of energy production, making them safer and more efficient? And so that sort of led me a little bit towards this project. As for the nuclear side of things, I'm a pretty big fan of nuclear energy. All in all, I'd say that seeing as though this is a field that we can grow into and help to answer some of these questions like climate change and energy crisis, it's just too good to ignore. I do have my own opinions on its effectiveness in comparison to other energy modes, but at the end of the day, I like nuclear power. With that said, one thing that I do think we can't ignore is the polarization that the nuclear field does have in the public eye. Let's just be frank, radiation can be scary. And the media loves to push this fear to the extremes, showing exactly what would happen if if worse comes to worse. And while reactors today are generally designed for better safety and mitigation of exposure to radiation, the implications of this fear I still worry about, and I wonder what it would mean for future nuclear projects. So all these sort of things led me to this research. And from there, and after doing a pretty investigative study into argumentative articles concerning nuclear energy, as well as talking to some members of the field of academia, I was able to discern a couple questions that I felt like would be important to this discussion. The first one was, does proximity to a nuclear reactor actually increase background radiation levels for the local area? And from there, are there any other positive correlations that we can find for other independent variables for this study? I mean, if it is true that when you're closer to a nuclear reactor, let's say in a community that's built for nuclear energy, that you have an increase in background radiations and maybe dangerous levels, well, that's important and we need to acknowledge that. But even if it is not true, that's still significant data and can be applied to many places in the real world, which I'll talk about later. Okay, so we kind of went into the why. I want to now discuss the how into this, how this research was completed and what equipment and methods were used to answer these questions that I just outlined. So first, in order to get these radiation readings, I needed a device that was capable of recording background radiation data over a specific unit of time, which ultimately led to the choice of the Fluke 481 ionization chamber. So the way an ion chamber detects radioactivity is by measuring a current that is generated from the ionization of gas within inside the chamber. When this gas interacts with ionizing radiation, it creates ion pairs that are then picked up by electrodes inside the chamber. These electrodes then generate a current which is proportional to a radiation dose rate that is then shown on the screen accordingly. So by using the integration mode on this device, I was able to capture 5-minute radiation readings at each location in units of microroentgen per hour. Now for these locations, I chose 45 specific radiation reading locations in relative proximity to the Training Research Isotopes General Atomics Reactor located on campus at the University of Utah. As you can see from the map to the right, which outlines all these locations, most of them were conducted around the reactor as a sort of centralized hub for this research. Even so, I still expanded to other areas across the valley in search of more significance elsewhere. In addition to keeping track of proximity to the reactor, I made sure to keep track of variables such as altitude and sunlight exposure versus comparison in the data. And finally, at each location, I did 5 to 10 radiation reportings, averaged up the background radiation levels that I received to get an approximate radiation level for every location. Okay, so let's get into some of the good stuff, the results. So the data that I'm going to present to you was organized into 3 separate categories, being the variables I listed, with proximity to a reactor, altitude, and overall sunlight exposure. The ultimate goal was to find any positive correlations between an increase in background radiation levels and any of these variables. So let's start with proximity. As you can see on the map, the red circle that you see is a 10-kilometer radius surrounding the nuclear reactor as a hypothesized area of significance for this study. The graphs that you see to the right include all the radiation readings with their background levels as well as the standard errors associated. The top graph shows all 45 readings conducted, while the bottom graph is just those within that 10-kilometer radius. The red dotted line is there showing a visual trend between the x-axis, being our variable, which in this case is proximity, and the y-axis, which is our radiation level. And if you look at the graphs, there really was no correlation that I could find between proximity to the trigger reactor on campus and an increase in background radiation levels. And even if you were to suggest that there was some sort of positive slope, which you can't see there is, well, then that means the data would say that as we got further away from the reactor, our radiation levels increased, which really doesn't make any sense. So ultimately, there was no correlation we could find. So let's move on to altitude, where there were some trends that were noticeable, as expected. The top graph shows all 45 radiation locations, minus the 3 that are listed below, with relevancy to altitude to radiation levels. As you can see again, there was really a neutral or no correlation from all 45 radiation levels between altitude and radiation levels, which might suggest that there was no trend. But then when we look at the bottom graphs, we start to see some things. Specifically at the Living Room Trail hike and Silver Lake Trail hike number 2 that I conducted, where there was over a 500-foot increase in elevation levels throughout the readings, we saw that as we increased in altitude, there was a general increase in background radiation levels, suggesting maybe there's a positive trend. So to confirm this, I went ahead and did one more hike at Silver Lake Trail, which had relatively no elevation change, and from there we saw a steady background rate, which once again confirms this. And I want to quickly note, this isn't new knowledge. I mean, as you increase in elevation, there's less matter, less air particles that are shielding radiation from the sun, and you should experience an increase in background levels. So the fact that our data confirms this helps validate it all in all. So let's go into the last one, which had probably the most obvious correlation being sunlight exposure. At each location, I made sure to record the climate in 3 different categories, that being sunny conditions, partly cloudy conditions, and full cloud cover conditions. As you can see on the bar graph shown on the left, for the sunny and partly cloudy conditions, there was really no noticeable deviation from the average background radiation level that we observed, which is around 4.5 microron per hour. However, when we went into the full cloud cover conditions, there was a noticeable drop-off from that level of 4.5 down to 4.1 microron per hour. And while none of these values are significantly above the radiation level that we expect in some dangerous level, that steep drop-off is still worth the note. And again, it's expected, as when there are clouds, that shields radiation levels. And it just further validates the data that we discovered. So, to quickly summarize, for the proximity readings, there really was no significant correlation between an increase in radiation levels and a closer proximity to the trigger reactor located on campus. While for the other 2 variables, we did notice slight positive trends, as we should expect. Okay, so let's finish up the discussion with what I think is the most important part for any research project at all, the why. Why does it matter, and where can this data be applied in the real world? Well, what are some of the implications? I think one of the more obvious intentions for this project was the promotion of nuclear energy by helping to neutralize some of the fears that came from the association of nuclear reactors in local proximity and an increase in radiation levels. From there, I also had, what I mentioned earlier, a own personal interest in promoting things like clean and sustainable energy. And I think that the lack of correlation that we found between proximity to a reactor and an increase in radiation levels can help promote nuclear energy in the future. The last, and more of a local impact, is where I think this data can be applied in the upcoming 2034 Winter Olympics. So for those who don't know, Utah has won the bid for the 2034 Winter Olympics to be held in the Salt Lake Valley and the Park City area, which is going to bring a mass influx of people to the area. So when you have any sort of large-scale event like this, one thing that needs to be done is a complete background radiation survey of the area to ensure overall public safety and security for the event. Now, by completing this research, what we've effectively done is provided the most up-to-date and current background radiation survey map for the area of Salt Lake City. And not only is this going to ensure public safety, but it's going to help expedite the process of the federal government and their survey by allowing them to compare their data with the radiation survey that I've completed, help ensuring a better level of public security. So finally, building off this public safety agenda, I wanted to talk about my future goal for this project, which is overall its expansion. Now, while my own coding skills are not up to par, I still think it would be a wildly beneficial thing to create an interactive model that can be used online where this data can be accessed. My vision is imagining a map where a user could click one of these location points and it would give you a radiation reading, the date that it was gathered, and possible verifications from other professionals who conducted their own readings. Not only would this allow us to promote the communication between the nuclear community and the public, but my hope is that all in all it would break down some of those barriers that exist between those that fear radiation and those that work with it. So, by creating some sort of software with this model, we're allowing everybody to make an accurate understanding of local radiation levels in their area, and helping to ease some of those concerns that are associated with nuclear energy. So to quickly sum up the research, we did a complete background radiation survey of the Salt Lake Valley, investigating any possible correlations that we could find between an increase in radiation levels and 3 variables I listed, that being proximity, altitude, and sunlight exposure. We were able to do this by gathering data from 45 specific locations and keeping track of the key variables that I just listed. From there, we generated trend-based models that suggested there was no real significance between proximity to the nuclear reactor, all located on campus, and an increase in background radiation levels, while the other 2 variables, as expected, did show some correlations. Ultimately, the goal for this research is to not only promote nuclear energy and nuclear power production, but to assist the federal government or any other large-scale event in things like the 2034 Winter Olympics. Maybe one day we can expand this research to a point into a public domain which can ensure better general public safety for everybody. So that's going to be all for me today. Here's the references for my research. And thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I can do my best to answer them now.
So I'm Bill Craig from formerly with the state radiation. Were you aware of the DOE aerial surveys that they've done in the past?
No.
Yeah, they did one in conjunction with the Uranium Mills project back in the 80s, mid-80s. They also did one prior to the 2002 Olympics. I actually tried to get the data from that one. They were reluctant. I don't know if it was security stuff, but I was never able to get that data. I think the group is out of Nevada, or used to be the area monitoring group. And then, of course, the uranium mill stuff has been disestablished as far as I know, but that, the state used to have one of the color-coded maps, ISO maps, that was produced for the uranium mill. That might be something that might be useful to you, so.
Right. No, I think that's a general model that I would like to follow, like when I picture it. And when I was searching for data like this online, at least for the Salt Lake Valley, was tough to find, and that was one of the key contributors to why I wanted to do this research and why my mentor, Dr. Edward Gonzalez, helped me push towards this project.
The other option, and Larry would probably have a better idea than this, is the RAP teams, I think, have done some surveys in the past because they're local units. So that's another, the Idaho RAP team.
Interesting, yeah. Maybe I can coordinate with them and try and build this radar to model. That'd be interesting. I appreciate that.
He probably won't have time to give the presentation. Maybe talk with Fred, who has, you did get a copy, Fred?
Yeah, but
There's some maps that they did during the 2016 vice presidential debate around the campus area. And then there's some aerial maps that they've done, with some RVDs that have been made.
Okay, perfect. I'll have to coordinate with you guys and check those out for sure. Yes.
So, just thinking, so from your map, it looked like you found a semi-correlation between areas that were further away from the trigger reactor and somewhat higher background levels of radiation. So I would say if you're going to do this again, consider the local geology of the area, because we are on the western slope radium sand field, and also there's a bunch of thorium-232 in the natural soil around here. And it looked like, based on the map, that the closer into the trigger reactor you were, the more into the built environment that you were, and the further out, the less in the built environment that you were. So the actual natural amount of background radiation would tend to be higher simply because there's not concrete over the top of it. So you might want to correlate that with the underlying background geology of the area, or maybe do a comparative study of different points with comparative built environments.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check that out when I continue this research. There were more areas I want to go to. I wanted to go to a general power reactor that was operating like somewhere in Illinois or, I don't know, elsewhere. I also wanted to investigate the Kennecott mine to see if there were any hotspots there, but I'll have to keep that in mind and research about that in the future.
So another thought just came up with his discussion with the geology, is the state of Utah has compiled records of the radon levels, test results from all over the valley by zip code for, oh my gosh, probably 20 plus years. I think it's online still.
Yeah, I was able to get it.
Okay, so that might be a correlation also.
True.
Great.
So there's just a quick follow-up. The RAP team, we've had them down several times, and Doug Walker, who cannot be here today, has offered to come down as well, and we'll have to team up because they have some mobile devices that you can track in real time.
Yeah, I would love that.
So it'd be great. And there's right off I-15, a little north of here, north of Ogden, where exactly is it though? It's right by
Yes.
the Army surplus.